The era Indomitus ushers in an age of terror not experienced within the galaxy since the days of the Horus Heresy, as half the Imperium's domain is blanketed in a nightmare shroud. Acts of unspeakable brutality are inflicted upon the inhabitants of Imperial worlds by Neverborn, Heretic, and Valxenos alike. Spilling forth from the gash in reality that is the Maledictum, or emerging from their hidden dens in reality, these beasts not only relish in new opportunities for feasting or conquest, but they also push against the borders of space between Imperium Nihilus and Sanctus. Not only this, Xenos races forever kept in check by the sheer scale of humanity's domains, the vastness of its reach, have been emboldened by recent galactic events. They take advantage of the Imperium's logistical blind spots, raiding planets for slaves, plunder, or merely the joy of it. Within this time and era where hope is a distant concept or the fool's domain, demigod warriors battle in the name of humanity's Imperium. Proud banners are raised atop stacks of battlefield debris and surrounded by the honoured dead. Their tattered weaves stand in brave defiance of the Xenos and the Heretic. These warriors are genetically enhanced soldiers, the chosen few who have been raised above mundane mortality to lead a life of never-ceasing conflict. They are Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines in Low Gothic. Despite the power these beings wield, there exist warriors who surpass even their genetic crafting or skill. The Adeptus Custodes, bodyguards to the greatest psyker the galaxy has ever known, the Emperor of Mankind, contain within the greatest secrets of their genetic crafting the ability to physically overcome the most natural or supernatural threats. Not only this, possessed of a sharp wit, as well as cold logic, the Emperor's Custodes are not only peerless warriors, but they are also scholars and even delegates, carrying the word of the Emperor or Avenging Sun to the darkest corners of the galaxy. So rare are these men, these works of gene-wrought art, that for one to witness a custodian guard in the flesh is all but impossible. For within the trillions of mortals who are the Imperium of Man, the Adeptus Custodes number but a few thousand, and they do not leave Terra's imperial palace but for the most dire or paramount of circumstance. Understanding how rare it truly is to encounter beings such as these is of supreme importance for the content to follow, for the Emperor was known to have cherished his Custodes so greatly that he, perhaps the coldest, most calculating of all, was hesitant to spend but one of their lives, when he would gladly send untold numbers of other, lesser soldiers into the jaws of certain death. In fact, the Emperor of Mankind, prior to his internment upon the Golden Throne, would engrave the names of his most beloved custodian guard within the inside of his personal plate. For one of the Custodes to perish, though not unthinkable, it is an event of great significance, as to take the life of one so powerful requires a supreme, coordinated martial effort, and they are not easily replaced. So now then we will examine the scarce documented instances his custodian guard have been bested in combat, before moving on to perhaps the holiest, most pure of all the Emperor's Astartes, the Grey Knights. Throughout the years predating Horus's betrayal at Isfahan, Lorgar Aurelian, son to the Emperor and Primarch of the 17th Legiones Astartes, word-bearers, would become embittered towards his father's atheist regime. Spiraling through deep, depressive episodes, he was robbed of purpose, his life from childhood up until now dedicated to fervent worship, being forced by his father to embody the imperial truth instead. Lorgar was utterly lost. Through the manipulative designs of those closest to him, however, Lorgar was convinced to embark upon the dark pilgrimage, a journey only the most devout undertake in order to bring true believers face to face with primordial beings worshipped as gods. In the tail end of the 30th millennium, Lorgar's expeditionary fleet would arrive in orbit over Cadia, a planet fated to play out scenes of uncurbed heresy and holy miracles alike in years to come. As some of you doubtless already are aware, mighty Cadia was not always the bastion of imperial might it was leading into the 41st and 42nd millennium. Truth be told, considering Cadia's proximity to a Terran reality such as the Eye, the human culture, which predated our modern-day Cadian troops, were a race of primitive, chaos-worshipping tribespeople. Though debased in their blasphemous religious practices, they did bear a likeness to the Cadians of the 41st millennium, in that both bore purple eyes due to the proximity to the Ocularis Terribus, or Eye of Terror, in Low Gothic. These ancestors to the more contemporary loyalist peoples of Cadia lived out brutal, tribal existences steeped in a mix of heresy and mythology, perpetuated by those cursed with the talent of the witch. Intrigued by the almost stoic personality of these primitives, paired with the deeply devout connection they so obviously shared with their true deities, any reservations which remained within Lorgar in favour of the Emperor's vision for humanity began deteriorating rapidly. Lorgar and his sons were so close to revelation. Even so, like is the case with so many decisive moments in humanity's history, terrible violence would herald a new beginning. The unthinkable was about to occur. Abhorred by the Cadian fanatics' religious practices, Custodian Guard Vendatha would attempt to cease the heretical sacrifices taking place in front of Lorgar, his sons, and the Custodian. Vendatha, you must understand though, was considered accomplished even by the superhuman standards of his kind. Having been trained by the legendary Amon Toramachian, Ven had served the Emperor for over a century by this time, having collected 27 names. Word-bearer Captain Argel Tal, friend to Vendatha, though ultimately loyal to his sire, would plead with the Custodian to stand down, to not press matters. Vendatha was not convinced, however, pressing Lorgar to surrender as the traitor he had so obviously become. He wished to take the Primarch to Terra immediately to face the judgment of the Emperor of mankind. Almost simultaneously, both sides struck, Vendatha making to slay Lorgar, ending the lives of 3 of the Word-bearer's best in as many seconds, before he unfortunately was downed by point-blank bolter fire. The giant golden warrior was bested, prone, stunned, utterly dismayed by this recent turn of events. Matters were made worse for the heroic Custodian when Argel Tal hurled his power sword towards Vendatha's head. The powered tip smashed through his faceplate, shattering his teeth and passing through the back of his skull. To the astonishment of those present, however, Vendatha yet lived. Utterly helpless, prone upon the dirt, his skull and teeth shattered, Vendatha still drew breath. His gene wrought might, providing the Custodes' body life enough for help to arrive in any normal circumstance. In this instance, Vendatha would live yet long enough to regret his perfection. His essence, that hand crafted by the Emperor of mankind himself, would provide the supreme sacrifice for the Chaos Priestess known as Ingathel to ascend into demonhood, able to then guide Lorgar within the warp to continue his dark pilgrimage. As for Vendatha, his end did not come swiftly. His body was violated by an enormous stake. Slowly, whilst alive, the Custodian Guard was impaled as all watched on in silent witness, the only noise the rhythmic beating drums played by the corrupted tribespeople. As blood and other less pure bodily fluids trickled down the stake, it was slowly pushed through the warrior's organs before exiting his mangled mouth. Vendatha suffered in silence, robbed even of the ability to yell in pain due to what little remained of his face and skull. Shockingly, Vendatha yet lived, and it would take longer still for his life to fully ebb away. Before we continue with our second, third, and fourth custodian deaths, murders which are often unfairly overlooked in epic retellings of the various Horus Heresy conflicts, we must briefly explain the original, purest of possessed Astartes, the Gal Vorbak. Led by word-bearers Captain Argel Tal of the Serrated Suns chapter, the first possessed Marines were called the Gal Vorbak, meaning the Blessed Sons in the language of Culture's people. This small chapter of Astartes had achieved a true symbiosis with their demonic passengers, resulting in truly powerful beings. Unlike the lesser, more insane possessed which cursed the battlefields of the 41st millennium, the Gal Vorbak were able to retain their original identity and even physical form. Whilst at rest or in the company of their brothers, the Gal Vorbak appeared as any other Astartes. During battle, however, they would take on the shape of grotesque, demon-afflicted creatures, their inner Neverborn gifting them bulk, strength, and amazing resilience. So it is then, upon that blighted world of Isfahan 5, further forces of the arch-traitor would reveal their true nature, turning upon brother legions in a cold-blooded display of treachery. So unimaginable was the concept of Astartes turning upon their own, let alone so many, that those loyalists caught in Horus' trap were utterly confused by the events unfolding, even as their legion brothers were struck down by bolter rounds or missile, dead before even hitting the dust of Isfahan 5. During this time of strife, Lorgar would make the decision to end the lives of the custodian host tasked by the Emperor to watch over him and his legion. Amid the tumult, Astartes against Custodian, a showdown would occur, one which pitched monsters of pure chaos in opposition to warriors so pure. In the dust of Isfahan 5, battle was joined between Custodian and Gal Vorbak. Unlike poor Vendatha, the three Custodians standing defiantly against Lorgar's heresy were ready for this fight. It must be stressed, however, that by the time Argel Tal and his Gal Vorbak did battle with Custodian Aquilon's squad, the Custodes had slaughtered countless foes upon the Wordbearer's warship before fleeing to the surface of Isfahan 5. So it was cornered on a world which now played host to among one of the most history-defining moments for the next 10,000 years. Custodian did join battle against Possessed. This was a fierce, close-range brawl. No punches were pulled, both sides reserving nothing but hatred for one another. Argel Tal was determined to carry out the commands of his gene-sire, surrendering to the more animalistic instincts of his inner demon, whilst his legion brothers were glad to finally be let off the leash, able to tear apart the Adeptus Custodes who had watched over them for decades now. As is often the case when two forces of such tremendous strength collide, the melee was brief, but extremely fierce. By the conflict's end, 5 possessed Marines still drew breath, whilst all 3 remaining Custodian Guard lay slaughtered and defiled. Each Custodian Guard distinguished themselves in this unrecorded, forgotten battle. Custodian Nurulus was laid low by 2 Gal Vorbak, the demonically infused pair leaping upon the Golden Warrior, stabbing between his armor's greaves in the Custodian's neck until the mighty warrior collapsed. Adding insult to an already gross betrayal, the Gal Vorbak Sakar remained to feast on the downed Custodian, Perhaps the creature within him wished to taste the finest flesh the Emperor had crafted. However, his vulnerable state, crouched over Naeselius, would leave an opening for Aquilon to dispatch the creature swiftly. As for the loyal custodian captain, Aquilon's head was torn from his body by the demonic jaws of Argyll Tal, whilst his last remaining brother, Synthron, was dragged down by the group of Gal Vorbak in a hail of jaws and claws. For those unaware, within the most recent lore available, the meddling of Cypher, Lord of the Fallen, has resulted in the death of yet another of the Emperor's favoured champions. You can find the full story of Cypher's recent adventure within the Imperial Palace in the link above on the screen, or if this feature is not present on your device, a link can be found in this video's description. Let's discuss in more detail now the most recent sacrifice made by one of the 10,000. At the forming of the Cicatrix Maledictum, demonic legions belonging to the Chaos God Khorne would descend upon the Imperial Palace in the bloody likeness of the siege which took place during the Horus Heresy. Pure chaos ensued as Grey Knights, Adeptus Sororitas, and most of the palace's custodian guard rallied at the upper levels of the palace to defend the God Emperor's sanctum against Khorne's legions. While this swirling war of epic proportions ground on, disparate Imperial craft assembled in the dark of the void above Terra. Among these was a single Astartes battle barge belonging to the Dark Angels chapter. Intent to learn further details of what ensued on Terra's surface, box traffic was intercepted, then sifted through intensely. It just so happened, whether by some quirk of fate or something more diabolical, a particularly curious if not unlikely Vox exchange was discovered. The most infamous, loathed of all fallen, had been jailed beneath the Imperial Palace, within the custodian's dark cells. He dwelt there now, unarmed, unarmoured, and ultimately helpless, or so it was believed. Recognizing in this moment the opportunity which had presented itself, a Dark Angel strike force was assembled. Inserting into the Imperial Palace whilst all hell broke loose, disguising their transports among the ruins of other vessels, which maintained a heavy, metallic rain from the heavens above. Ultimately, Cypher, the most hunted fallen Dark Angel in all the galaxy, eluded capture by his more modern, misled brothers, but not before turning the hunters into the prey. A deceiver to the core, Cypher's erstwhile jailer, Custodes Warden Hikaron, intercepted the Dark Angel's kill team far below the Imperial Palace, close to the Emperor's inner sanctum. Within an ancient, depthless cavern lined with colonnades, statues of forgotten Imperial heroes watched on. Under their baleful gaze, Custodian Warden Hikaron steps out to meet the interloping sons of Caliban. It was during this moment that both knew they had been deceived. Nevertheless, Librarian Mordecai, who led the Unforgiven task force, knew there was but one way forward. Only a direct approach could result in his brothers departing Terra with their quarry in chains, and their presence here unrecorded. Mordecai makes the first move. The Astartes, a pack of wolves, fall upon the lion at their fore. A torrent of bolter fire is levelled towards Hikaron, however he weaves throughout most, whilst only a paltry few make contact with his armour, chips of auramite spraying off as the custodian charged amidst the angels. His guardian spear ends one of his attackers as its edge passes through his throat, and he is amongst them now. 3 more Dark Angels die to his spear as the Shadowkeeper's Warden dances through their lines, using the statues of ancient heroes as cover. A 4th and 5th Deathwing perish before the blood of the first to die has even hit the cold, dust-laden ground. 2 more are felled. 6 of the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever known are killed mercilessly in as many heartbeats. Mordecai brings his enormous powers to bear, telekinetic force struggles to slow the custodian, whilst lightning racks his body. The custodian's force of will, paired with his armor's inbuilt defenses against such warp-fueled lethality, the alchemy of his making, and inscribed words of power etched upon Hekaron's auric armor, struggle to fend off against Mordecai's psychic attack. He struggles to move at his usual demigod pace, as Mordecai's invisible telekinetic bonds tie him in place. The surviving Dark Angels unleash the fury of their weapons in this time the epistolary has afforded them. Missiles and bolter rounds hammer into Hekaron, warden of the dark cells of the Shadowkeeper shield host. As Hekaron slumps against one of the statues on the colonnade, the Dark Angel survivors lock plasma grenades to each of their dead, erasing any trace of their presence before they pass through the door beyond. As you can see, the Emperor's gene crafting, although superior to any other in known existence, does not create gods of men. A custodian guard is still yet mortal, as much as their superhuman capabilities may suggest otherwise. Now, besides these bodyguards of the Emperor, his most trusted companions, there exists a chapter of Astartes whose loyalty is beyond reproach, whose combat abilities surpass any other Astartes chapter in history. Let us discuss the most infamous deaths of the Grey Knights. For those of our listeners perhaps not privy to the innermost workings of the Ordo Malleus Chamber Militant, that is the Grey Knights, it is difficult to convey the exacting standards by which a mortal recruit is measured before so much as beginning the first trial of initiation. Given all initiates must be touched by the gift of the Psyche to start with, means ostensibly that the Grey Knight recruitment pool is the smallest within all Astartes chapters. Not only this, of the small quantity who are selected, the few psychically gifted who also meet the strict health, age, and strength requirements must pass the 666 trials known as the Rituals of Detestation, in which many lose their minds. The sheer horror of what is faced during a Grey Knight's initiation can only help prepare them so much for the true evil they face in a galaxy warped by the ruinous powers of those who fail. Death is their preferred fate, for during these trials an initiate learns many secrets, as well as horrifying facts of the warp, and such knowledge cannot be allowed to exist within those minds that are not conditioned fully to handle such esoteric facts. As such, many who fail, whether injured but still useful, or even sound of mind but failing some minute detail within their trials, in payment for their bravery but punishment for their failings, many are sentenced to servitude in perpetuus, the process by which a mortal is tortuously turned into a lobotomized servitor. Now, although the Grey Knights maintain a reputation of spiritual purity, they are also responsible for inflicting some of the most heinous atrocities upon humanity for the Imperium's greater good. Infamous reputation to the side though, Grey Knight Astartes are trained to combat the demon. The most legendary victories belong to these secretive Astartes. Knowledge of their existence, as well as that of the foe they hunt, is kept by any measures necessary. So effective are the Grey Knights when doing battle against the corrupted forces of chaos. Sprawling armies of demons or traitor Astartes are overcome by but a handful of Grey Knight Marines. By striking at the heart of the enemy, heretics are rendered leaderless and demonic hosts fade back into the ether, their beastly generals' heads laying at the feet of a Grey Knight hero. They have been known to emerge victorious against traitor demon primarchs, as well as the most powerful greater demons belonging to the most esteemed demonic choirs. Given the nature of the foe the 666th chapter do battle against, their existence is kept secret to all but the highest ranking imperial officials on Terra. Though the most legendary, magnificent battles are executed by these dauntless warriors, none will know their name, and no body will mourn their passing, none but a handful of their true brothers in arms. Not for the Grey Knights, a hallowed homeworld where their people vie for the honour of being chosen to join the ranks of an Astartes chapter. No single culture permeates the ranks of the Grey Knights. They are the bravest, most stalwart defenders of humanity, and theirs is truly thankless work. For warriors so mighty, there are of course many times they have been laid low in battle. More often than not, a task force of but a handful of brothers can be spared to combat any single demonic threat. So numerous are the enemies of the Grey Knights, and so few are they in number. As for more senior Grey Knights, a single Marine is often dispatched to investigate or even combat demonic threats, even when those closest to him are aware he will not likely return. And so you can understand then why the mortality rate among this vaunted chapter is so great. To begin with, we will discuss the fate of Epimetheus. We have spoken of this brother in a previous video, and I am sure a number of my listeners are aware of his actions during the Battle of Pandorax, and ultimately of his fate. So we will keep this brief and to the point. It may surprise some to learn that of the original 8 founding members of the Grey Knights, one of them, Epimetheus, originally of the Dark Angels chapter, was taken prisoner by Abaddon the Despoiler. We will not detail the exact events leading up to his capture, though they are interesting, and if you wish to learn more, the story of Epimetheus lies within the novel Pandorax. From what little we know of Epimetheus, besides being one of the original 8 founding Grey Knights, Epimetheus was a powerful psyker, even by his chapter's standards. Being a founding brother, his progenoid glands would have been the original gene matter created under the command and assumedly supervision of Malcador and the Emperor. Given Grey Knight gene seed contains traces of the Emperor's own genetic code, this speaks to the value of Epimetheus' progenoid glands within the 41st millennium when Pandorax is set. The last fact you must be aware of is that Epimetheus was rumoured to be one of the Dark Angels fallen. Now, at the conclusion of Pandorax, Epimetheus is taken into custody by the Black Legion. Chained, a prisoner of the Despoiler, is certainly not a fate deserved for a warrior of such legendary repute. Given the raw power of Epimetheus' psychic gifts, nulls are used in close proximity to not only abduct the Marine, but also to ensure his bindings hold true during his incarceration. As we said though, the genetic material within Epimetheus is truly valuable. Wondrous organs laced with the genetic sequencing of the Emperor himself. As such, Epimetheus, like poor Vendatha, would suffer a truly horrifying fate. To make certain Epimetheus was not able to conjure his way free of the Black Legion's cells, his tongue was removed. To rob him of his senses, Epimetheus' eyes were plucked from their sockets, then his eyelids and mouth were both sewn shut. As a final, excruciating twist of the knife, the warrior's black carapace was cracked open while he yet lived. His progenoid glands, those organs which truly made him who he was, were excised, and a psychic null was implanted onto him. It is not clear whether this last act was some means of bitter torture inflicted by the whim of the Despoiler, or if, after already robbing Epimetheus of so much, Abaddon still feared what the son of Caliban was capable of. Perhaps we will never know. What is certain, however, is that the progenoid glands removed from Epimetheus were gifted to the maniacal genius Fabius Bile. Whether we will learn what secrets Fabius is capable of gleaning from this, who can say? Epistolary Glaucus of the Grey Knights was an especially fated individual, even among that honoured brotherhood, during his more impetuous younger years, and not yet tempered in battle proper. He was among those who saw combat in the first war for Armageddon, against his Justicar's wishes, that is. For given the nature of the foe the Grey Knights are sworn to combat, an Astartes must not just be an incredibly capable warrior, but through all experiences they must stay centred, spiritually pure, and levelled towards their duty to the Emperor. For a young Grey Knight to experience battle against the forces of the demon too soon, without first realising their greater calling, can result in a being ill-suited to the task at hand. Rage, revenge, these are qualities shed by the brothers of the 666th chapter, but not by Glaucus. The tale of Glaucus' undoing began during the First War for Armageddon. You see, when the Red Angel Angron, damned son of the Emperor and father of the World Eaters, did rain down death and destruction upon the world of Armageddon in 444 M41, Imperial forces consisting of the famed Armageddon Steel Legion and the savage Space Wolves under the leadership of Logan Grimnar himself fought valiantly. Nevertheless, the raw bloody might of Khorne surged over Armageddon with his mightiest champion in the fore, and there seemed to be no way to stop this tide of murder. The only hope at defeating Angron, and therefore scattering the disparate forces under him, was held by a Grey Knight strike force contacted by the Great Wolf. Brother Captain Aurelian of the Third Brotherhood, the Wardmakers as they are called, led the Grey Knight's contingent, though even armed with 109 of the galaxy's most effective Daemonhunters, the odds of success were low indeed, for not only would the Grey Knights need to teleport directly into the heart of Angron's forces to confront the Demon Primarch, they would also be required to contend with the Cruor Praetoria, a bodyguard of 12 bloodthirsters of Khorne. These were not regular greater demons, if such a thing could be said, but the most powerful of their kind, those who most embodied the Blood God's demeanour, or whose actions raised them in the Blood God's esteem. Against such foes, surrounded by lesser choirs of demons and even ancient world eaters as they were, the likelihood of victory was minor indeed. Nevertheless, as ever is the case with servants of the Dark Gods, their hubris, or even bloodlust, is often their undoing, as innumerable Imperial servants sacrificed their lives to buy time for the Grey Knights. A swirling melee was taking place around the Demon Primarch. Angron would find himself unarmed and vulnerable, as when he made to strike the hero Hyperion, the power and the purity of the Grey Knight's spirit shattered the creature's tainted blade, leaving Angron open for an opportunistic counterattack. After all, when battling against a being of such raw power, is there any other way to strike besides seizing what opportunity fate may award you? And so, disarmed before Angron could gather his wits, Brother Captain Aurelian sold his life to banish the Demon Prince. Moving dangerously close to Angron, and within the beast's guard, he died of his wounds, but fulfilled his duty. At battle's end, only 13 brothers still lived, Glaucus among them. He had survived even his own Justicar, that is, Grey Knight squad leader. But why is Glaucus' tale considered a lament? What tragedy can befall one who would survive such a bloody, fierce encounter? You see, during the final showdown against the Demon Prince Angron, when Hyperion did shatter the Primarch's black blade, a small shard of that demonically corrupted weapon lodged itself within Glaucus' thigh. So although the young Astartes survived his first major conflict, the wound he suffered would ensure that Glaucus should never again benefit from any great time free of the intense pain it visited upon him. For even under the most accomplished apothecary's tools, the small piece of shrapnel wriggled and evaded any blade seeking to excise it from Glaucus' leg. But rather than amputating his entire limb, the incredible mental fortitude of Glaucus would come to the fore. He would bear the constant pain of this demon-inflicted wound for his remaining years. Whether at rest or in combat, the constant warm thudding, angry pain inflicted by the piece of Angron's blade would forever remind Glaucus of his duty, and secretly, though he would never admit it, even to himself, it would remind Glaucus of his need for revenge. Over the next 6 centuries, Glaucus would hunt down any clue of when Angron would be reborn next. Plagued with rage over the pain he chose to bear, Glaucus would use the shrapnel within his leg to his advantage by drawing a connection to the Primarch, the piece of shrapnel providing a connection to Angron himself. The ensuing battles would be fierce, Glaucus even stooping so far as to summon Slaanesh demons upon Angron's capital ship, the Conqueror, to waylay the vessel during warp transit. And though Glaucus Grey Knights would finally earn the opportunity to face Angron on the world of Hyades, amidst the beast hordes of crazed followers, they would ultimately fail in ending him. It would take nothing less than bordering the Conqueror itself, attempting to destroy the corrupted vessel from within, for the Grey Knights to succeed at banishing Angron. This would also deal a bloody wound to the 12th Legion, many World Eaters Astartes on board perishing with their Gene Father. Consider that for one moment. Does this act of teleporting aboard the nightmare flagship of Khorne's favoured servant not bear testament to the bravery of those few Grey Knights? Certain they would not live long enough to safely return to their brothers on Titan, Glaucus Grey Knights steeled themselves for the ultimate sacrifice. In an effort to offer at least some edge against the Primarch in single combat, Glaucus had been strapped within a dreadnought called the Sanctity and Trust, built for the purpose of enabling Grey Knights to more easily combat greater demons. But were Glaucus to locate Angron, the Sanctity and Trust would no doubt be pushed to the limit of its ability. Once aboard, these few, 11 brothers in total, bore witness to nightmare scenes which would shatter the sanity of any lesser being. Other Astartes, lacking the spiritual purity or strength of purpose which is instilled in all Grey Knights during their rites of initiation, would struggle to resist the murder lust which in itself was a palpable wave upon the Conqueror. Projecting an Aegis field about themselves, this thin psychic veil would be all that stood between the Grey Knights' brothers and some of the worst horrors within the material realm. In the name of Malkador the Sigillite and the Master of Mankind, the Grey Knights could not fail, as waves of pure hatred were repelled by the Grey Knights' Aegis field. Neverborn slunk from the shadowy depths of the Conqueror's spiraling corridors to launch themselves at the Grey Knights' defences, only to evaporate against the Aegis field projected before them. World Eater Marines not fazed by the Grey Knights' demonic wards charged throughout the Aegis, only to be mown down by storm bolters and Psy Cannon alike. They faced these horrors and more besides, such as elite World Eater Terminators, all in a supreme effort to reach either Angron or the command deck of the Conqueror, whichever presented itself first. Slowly, Grey Knights would fall, their psychic defences or Terminator armour not able to withstand the constant waves of berserk World Eaters whirring chain blades and rusted maces, smashing apart the Grey Knights' armoured bulk. The battle at hand was merely a prelude. This struggle, an insane melee of etheric forces, as much as it was a fight in any physical sense, was only the path to the insane demon Primarch. There was no surety that should Glaucus locate Angron, that his long-awaited goal of sending the Primarch back to the warp could even be achieved, let alone by a small detachment of battle-worn Grey Knights, legendary indeed as they were. For all knew Angron bore no semblance to the being he once was during the Great Crusade, or even the Heresy years. During the Red Angel's efforts at the Siege of Terra, he was far more sound of mind than he was now. In the millennia since that time, Angron had become a force of nature, murderlust made manifest. He was not capable of stopping the perpetual slaughter he was so widely known for now. And how do you combat a tornado, let alone one which wields dual demon-infused weapons, each taller than a space marine? When epistolary Glaucus did finally meet Angron in open combat, only he and his brother Dvorak, a paladin ancient, remained. Glaucus having fought his way through the Conqueror's cavernous depths, Angron, his skin singed, heaving from the fallout of the destruction of Hyades, in which he was present, but miraculously still alive. Glaucus grasped for the protestations of genetic divinity, as the influence of Angron's maddening presence tugged at the unholy shard buried deep inside his leg. Dribble began to run freely down the Grey Knight's chin in some bizarre likeness to the berserkers of the World Eater's Legion. All this whilst the massive bulk of Angron watched on in silence, an evil smile cracking the demonic visage of his face. The Emperor, father to both Angron and Glaucus, did not intend for such twisted abominations to triumph over humanity. Glaucus could not hope to defeat Khorne's greatest champion, fueled by anger, but it had brought him this far. Battle was joined. Within the cursed bowels of the Conqueror, it was like trying to apply martial skill to ward off a savage, hungry animal. Every attack Angron made was backed by supreme strength, whilst his technique was a mix of ancient gladiatorial skill blended with a type of ballistic fury which disregarded most known, formal counters Glaucus could hope to muster. Whilst the Grey Knight's epistolary did skillfully administer his own blows to Angron's ribs and even jaw, using his Dread Knight's mighty fists, Angron would best him again and again, a dozen times even. But every time Angron's sword Samniarius or his chain axe Spinegrinder should make to pierce Glaucus' parry to deliver a killing blow, the ghosts of Glaucus' brothers were present to aid him, blocking the vile weapons with their own ethereal force blades, or confounding the demon prince with ghostly apparitions of stormbolter shells, sending Angron reeling back, just enough for Glaucus to recover once more. You see, though Glaucus' brothers' souls now sought peace within the Emperor's embrace, the power of their oaths as the 13 who survived the first war for Armageddon kept them bound to Glaucus now, aiding him in this final showdown they had all worked so fervently towards. As Angron finally pinned Glaucus' Dread Knight to the ground, severing the machine's side cannon arm with an outward kick of a hoof, it seemed Glaucus was finished. At that moment, Dvorak was able to finally intervene. Angron's rage has scattered the lesser choirs of demons and world eaters, tying up the paladin until now, with an immense psychic torrent of words which dislocated his jaw. Paladin Ancient Dvorak announced a portion of Angron's true name towards the fallen Primarch. The effect was immediate, and Angron at once stumbled back, smoke gushing from his throat as if he had just ingested a torrent of holy water. Unlikely as it was, it did seem the pair of Grey Knights had retrieved the upper hand from this ill-fated clash. Despite this, they had dedicated so much to banishing Angron, they had failed to split their attention to ward off any attempts the corrupt Conqueror itself may make to defend its true master. A grey-haired woman in a crisp white uniform appeared within the command deck, locking eyes with Glaucus. A bloody handprint encompassed her chest. Bulkheads began to systematically fail, blowing out into the cold of the surrounding void, taking the two Grey Knights with them. In the cold, airless environment that was the dead of space, the Grey Knights, fast becoming distant specks compared to the mountain which was the Conqueror, spied Angron sprinting out of the breached deck. Impossibly, the metaphysical nature of Angron would see his leathery wings beating in the void, completely untroubled, powering the demon prince squarely on a trajectory for Glaucus. Battered aside with ease, Angron sent Glaucus spinning through the cold, dead void. At this moment, as Glaucus spied the destruction wrought upon the world of Hyades, a planet sacrificed by himself in a failed attempt to banish the demon Primarch, he at last realized that his own anger, his own contempt, the deaths he brought about in his mission to banish Angron, had only fed the sanguinary unholiness, for Khorne cared not from whence the blood flowed. All this strife, the countless death, only bestowed more strength upon the demon Primarch. In a moment of clarity, Glaucus used what remained of his psychic might to hurl Dvorak towards the Conqueror, in the hope that the Paladin Ancient may still find some sanctuary. "I deny you, demon," Glaucus whispered, as Angron bore down upon him. Before the hungry demonic metal of Angron's blade Samniarius could pierce Glaucus' flesh, he cast his own soul away, out of his mortal shell, denying Angron the victory he so hungrily sought. And so do mankind's greatest heroes sacrifice everything they are and all they will ever become upon the alien worlds and the cold void of space. Their sacrifice forgotten to the passing of millennia, but the meaning of their martyrdom everlasting, for the betterment of our species. Did you enjoy this video? Make sure you write a comment letting me know your thoughts on these various horrible fates suffered by the Emperor's finest, the Adeptus Custodes and Grey Knights chapter. Likewise, do you believe there exist warriors even greater than these who also serve the Imperium? Let me know. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as it's free for you and it's an immense help as far as reach and growth are concerned for Titan Wargaming. Remember, if you want to hobby together or game online, you can check out the Patreon tiers in the description. If you want to save 21% off Warhammer, check out our link to Gap Games, also in the description. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you had a good time and that these tales sparked your own imagination. Until next time, take it easy and have a good one.